My name is Nora Ellison. I'm 36 years old. And the last time I walked into St. Augustine Medical Center, I was bracing myself to be the difficult one again. That's the label my mother gave me when I was 14. She said it at a dinner table in front of my aunt, my uncle, and 2 neighbors who had come over for Sunday pot roast. She said it like a verdict, not a complaint, not a frustration, but a settled fact she'd arrived at long ago and was now sharing with the world for its own good. Nora's always been our complicated one. I was sitting 3 feet away. I had just asked why Danielle got the bigger bedroom after the renovation when the rooms were identical in the original floor plan. That was the crime. That was the reason I became complicated. I didn't know then that one word, one label, placed on a 14-year-old girl by the person she trusted most would follow her for the next 22 years like a shadow with a pulse. I know it now. If this story already sounds like something you've lived inside, please take a second to hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the beginning, and tell you exactly how I ended up in that hospital hallway being told things my mother never meant for me to hear. The Ellison family lived in Claremont, a mid-sized city in upstate New York where everyone has known everyone else long enough that reputations travel faster than news. My mother, Patricia Ellison, was 62 at the time of the hospital call. She had beautiful posture, a sharp eye for social hierarchies, and an extraordinary ability to make her feelings about you feel like objective facts about you. She chaired the church social committee for 11 years. She was first on the phone tree for every neighborhood event. She knew exactly who in town was struggling financially, romantically, professionally, and she discussed these things with the specific compassion of someone who enjoys knowing. My father, Richard Ellison, died 6 years ago. He was a quiet man, a civil engineer who came home every evening at 5:47 and spent weekends restoring old radios in the garage. He loved my mother in the particular way that certain steady men love difficult women, completely, and without asking for much in return. I don't think he understood the full machinery of what Patricia built in that house. I don't think he saw the sorting that happened under his own roof. But I did. I saw it from the time I was old enough to understand that 2 daughters could live in the same house and be raised in entirely different worlds. My sister Danielle is 39. Danielle is the good one. Not just in our family's telling, but in her own bearing. She walks into rooms like she expects to be welcomed, which is what happens when you've never been told, at any table in front of any witness, that you are the complicated one. She married Marcus Marsh at 28, a commercial real estate developer with a ready laugh and a habit of deferring to my mother at family dinners. They have 2 children, Lily, 7, and James, 5. They bought a house in a suburb 20 minutes from my mother's. Danielle calls Patricia every morning. Not because she has to. Because it doesn't cost her anything. My relationship with my mother has never been that simple. I am a hospital billing compliance officer. I have worked at Fairview Regional Medical Center for 9 years. I hold 2 professional certifications. I manage a team of 6 people. I earn a salary I built from scratch, own a 1-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building I chose because the light in the kitchen in the mornings is extraordinary, and I have been told by 3 separate colleagues, independently and without prompting, that I am the calmest person they know in a crisis. My mother tells people I work in medical billing. She says it in the particular voice she reserves for things she finds slightly embarrassing, the voice she uses when she means to diminish without technically saying anything unkind. I stopped correcting it in front of her years ago. Every correction became evidence. Difficult. Combative. Can't let anything go. That was the operating system. And here is what it looked like in practice. Any time I said something Patricia didn't want heard, it got attributed to my nature rather than to the fact that what I was saying was true. She was extraordinarily consistent about this. Consistent in the way that tells you the thing is not accidental. At 14, I asked about the bedroom. Complicated. At 19, I asked why my college application essay had been shared with family members without my permission. So private, always so private with everything. Difficult. At 22, I told her that she hadn't forwarded me the renewal forms for a merit scholarship and I had lost the award. She told everyone I blamed her for my own disorganization. She cried at the dinner table, and I became the reason for her tears. At 26, I pointed out that our Thanksgiving gathering had not included me in the planning for the third year running while Danielle managed every visible role, the centerpiece, the blessing, the standing at my mother's elbow in every photograph. My mother told Danielle I was jealous. Danielle believed her because Danielle had never been given a reason not to. 22 years. The same label, the same mechanism, applied to every question I ever asked, every line I declined to cross, every moment I refused to pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. Then my father died. Richard Ellison had a massive stroke on a Tuesday morning in November, 6 years ago. He was in the garage, working on a 1962 Zenith transistor radio. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. He was 67 years old. He had never once called me complicated. He had never once looked at me the way Patricia looked at me. And losing him meant losing the one person in that house who saw me clearly and said nothing wrong in the seeing. The grief was clean and sudden and enormous, the way grief is when the person who dies was genuinely good. What came after the grief was not clean. My father left a will. Patricia had been named executor. She gathered us in the living room 10 days after the funeral, Danielle on the couch with Marcus, me in the armchair by the window, my Aunt Colleen present as family witness. Patricia sat at the head of the room. She had a document in her lap. "Your father wanted everything managed through me," she said. "He trusted me to handle the distribution as I saw fit. He didn't want anything to be complicated." That word. Even in grief. Complicated. There had been an estate attorney, she explained. His name was Gerald Farrow, now retired. Everything was settled. The house transferred to her, which we expected. The retirement accounts transferred to her, which was standard. And there were 2 additional lump sum distributions, she said. Gifts from your father. Danielle received $95,000, directed toward her and Marcus's mortgage. "A thank you for giving him grandchildren," Patricia said. "For building the kind of family he always wanted." I received nothing. When I asked, calmly, sitting in that armchair with Aunt Colleen watching, I received the following explanation: "Your father wanted you to stand on your own, Nora. He was proud of how independent you are. He didn't want to interfere with that." I looked at my mother. He had given Danielle $95,000 and given me independence as a gift. Patricia's expression went still. The kind of still that comes before a temperature change. I said, "I'd like to see a copy of the estate documents." What followed was not a conversation. It was a performance I had seen in smaller forms my entire life, now scaled to the size of a funeral. Tears. Colleen reaching for her hand. Marcus touching Danielle's arm. The suggestion that I was doing this, asking a legal question about my father's estate, at a time of grief, in front of family, which made it not just impolite but almost cruel. "Do you hear yourself?" Danielle said, her voice low. "Dad just died." "I want to see the documents," I said again. I never saw them. Within the week, the story had circulated through Claremont in the way stories circulate when Patricia Ellison is the one setting them loose. Her younger daughter had made a scene at the estate reading. Demanded money. Accused her mother of hiding things. A week after the funeral, no less. I had done none of those things. But in a town where everyone has known everyone else for 30 years, a story told confidently by a woman who chairs the church social committee lands differently than a quiet denial from a daughter with a 22-year reputation for being difficult. I drove back to my apartment and called the attorney listed on the business card my father had kept in his desk, Gerald Farrow, Farrow and Associates, now retired. The number was disconnected. I hired my own attorney for one consultation. She told me that without the original will documents, a contested estate was expensive and difficult to prove without evidence. She used that word. Difficult. I almost laughed. 6 years passed. 6 years of Thanksgiving dinners where I sat at the far end of the table. 6 years of Christmas mornings where Danielle's children received elaborate collections of gifts while my envelope contained a check for $50 and a card signed "Love, Mom" in the careful cursive of someone completing a task. 6 years of family photographs where I stood at the edge of every frame, slightly too far from the center, the way you stand when no one has told you to move closer and you've stopped expecting the invitation. 6 years of Patricia telling anyone who asked, and some who didn't, that she worried about Nora. That Nora had never forgiven the family for something Nora had imagined. That Nora was the difficult one, the complicated one, the daughter she prayed for every night. The performance of her maternal suffering over me was so practiced, so layered with genuine-sounding regret, that I believe she had eventually come to experience it as real. The story she told so many times had become the story she lived in. I kept my distance and I kept my life. I went to work. I managed my team. I ran 3 miles every Sunday morning before the rest of the city was awake. I called Patricia every 2 weeks because she was my mother and because I had not yet decided what it meant to stop. The last conversation we had before the hospital call was at Christmas, 8 weeks prior. Patricia had organized a gathering at Danielle's house, 22 people, catered trays from the Italian place on Marquette, Lily and James in matching red pajamas for the family photo. I had been assigned, not asked, assigned, to bring dessert. I brought a cake from Forest Bakery on 5th. Chocolate espresso, 3 layers, exactly the kind my father used to request every year for his birthday. I set it on the counter without ceremony and stepped back. Danielle's neighbor, a woman named Cheryl, looked at it and said it was beautiful. Patricia appeared at my elbow almost immediately. She picked up a sugar cookie from the store-bought tray someone else had brought, and said to Cheryl with a pleasant tilt of her head, "Nora always does things her own way." "That's very her." Cheryl looked uncertain. "It's a gorgeous cake," she said. Patricia smiled. "Nora's never really been comfortable doing things the way the rest of us do. She's always been a little," she paused just long enough, "independent." Cheryl glanced at me. I smiled. I set down my fork. And for the first time in 6 years, I chose not to absorb it. I looked at my mother directly and said, "I brought a cake, Mom. That's all." Patricia blinked. The kitchen went 3 degrees colder in the space of 2 seconds. I spent the rest of the evening near the fireplace talking to Aunt Colleen's husband about his woodworking. At 9:30 I said goodnight and drove home. My phone was quiet the entire way. The call came on a Wednesday evening in February, at 6:12 p.m. The caller ID read St. Augustine Medical Center, the hospital where I had been employed for 9 years. My first instinct was professional. Had something happened with a billing case I was managing? A compliance issue after hours? It was not professional. "Ms. Ellison? This is the nursing supervisor on the cardiac care unit at St. Augustine. Your mother, Patricia Ellison, was brought in by ambulance approximately 2 hours ago. She's experienced a significant cardiac event. She's stable but in critical condition. You're listed in her file as her primary emergency contact." I pulled the car to the curb. "I'm listed as her emergency contact?" "Yes, ma'am. You're also listed as her medical power of attorney." I sat with that for a moment. My mother, who had spent the better part of my adult life telling rooms full of people that I was the difficult one, the complicated one, the daughter she didn't quite know what to do with, had quietly, at some point, given me the legal authority to make her medical decisions. "What about my sister?" I asked. "Danielle Marsh?" A brief pause. "Your sister is listed as a secondary contact. We've been attempting to reach her for approximately 2 hours. We haven't been able to." "Of course." I turned the car around. I drove to St. Augustine. I walked through the lobby where I had worked for 9 years, past the reception desk where nurses who know my name said good evening, and into the elevator that took me to the cardiac care unit on the 3rd floor. And that is where Dr. Marcus Ray is, a cardiologist I had passed in the hallway at least 100 times over 9 years, stepped out of the nursing station, saw me, and said, "Ms. Ellison. I'm glad you came. I need to speak with you privately before you see your mother." Those words. The quiet weight of them. He led me to the consultation room off the main corridor, the small one with the window that looks onto the parking structure, the room we use when families need a moment away from the general noise. I had walked past it 1,000 times. I had never sat in it. He closed the door and set a manila folder on the table between us. On top of it, a sealed envelope, cream-colored, business-sized. My name written on the front in careful, deliberate handwriting I did not recognize. "Your mother is stable," he began, and I appreciated that he led with that. The event was significant, a blockage in the left anterior descending artery. She was found by a neighbor and brought in responsive. She's sedated following a procedure. She'll be moving in and out of consciousness for the next several hours. I nodded. "But before you go in to see her," he set his hand briefly on the folder, "I need you to have the full picture. Because what our patient advocate found when she was pulling intake documents is something I believe you have a right to know. Not as your mother's physician. As a matter of basic fairness to you." I looked at the envelope. At my name on the front. "Who wrote that?" I asked. Dr. Reyes looked at it carefully. "Your father's attorney. A man named Gerald Farrow." The name landed the way a stone lands in still water. Farrow and Associates. The disconnected number. 6 years of quiet. "Mr. Farrow has been attempting to reach you for approximately 4 years, Dr. Reyes continued. He was unable to locate your current address through his own channels. 18 months ago, he sent a letter to this hospital addressed to your department, because you are listed as a beneficiary in your father's original estate documents and this hospital is your documented employer." He paused. The letter was misfiled by our administrative office. It was attached to a patient records folder that had been incorrectly indexed. Our patient advocate, Denise Park, located it today while pulling your mother's intake records and cross-referencing emergency contacts. She brought it to me because your name was on it and you are employed here. He was precise with every word. The precision of a man who understood the weight of what he was saying. "I haven't opened it," he said. "It's addressed to you and it's sealed." "That isn't my place." He met my eyes directly. "But in the cover note attached to the outside of the envelope, which I have read, Mr. Farrow indicates that he retained a copy of your father's original will. And that the distribution of your father's estate, specifically the lump sum gifts, was not consistent with the original document he drafted." The room shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way things shift in stories. Just a very quiet, very real recalibration of everything I thought I knew about the past 6 years. "Not consistent," I repeated. "That is the language Mr. Farrow used, yes." I looked at the envelope. I thought about Patricia down the hall, sedated, connected to monitors, her chest rising and falling in numbers on a screen. I thought about the 11 years she chaired the church social committee and the 22 years she told every room about her complicated youngest daughter. I thought about $95,000 and independence as a gift. I thought about a Christmas party and a cake from Forest Bakery and my mother's head tilting at me like I was something she couldn't quite classify. I thought about a disconnected phone number and the specific exhaustion of grieving a father and a missing inheritance at the same time. I reached out and picked up the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. "Is there anything I need to do before I go in to see her?" I asked. Dr. Reyes looked at me with the expression doctors use when professional constraint prevents them from saying the full truth but they want you to know the full truth exists. "Take your time with that letter. And if anything in it requires follow-up with a legal professional, our patient advocate can provide referrals." He stood. I stood. He opened the door. In the hallway, he turned back once. "Ms. Ellison. Whatever her reasons, the fact that your mother listed you as her primary contact and her medical proxy. Not your sister. You. She made that choice years ago and she never changed it." I nodded. He walked back to the nursing station. I stood in that corridor with a sealed envelope in my hands, my mother 40 feet away behind a monitored door, and a letter that had spent 4 years finding its way to me finally arrived. I didn't open it yet. I needed to see her first. Not for her sake. For mine. Because I had spent 22 years being called the difficult one in rooms full of people who accepted it without question, and before that envelope changed what I knew about my own history, I needed to look at Patricia Ellison, the woman who told every room, every gathering, every holiday dinner about her complicated youngest daughter. I needed to see her as exactly what she was in that moment. Not a narrator. Not a judge. Just a woman in a hospital bed. Just a person who was sick and frightened, and who had, in the quiet paperwork of her private life, called for me first. I tucked the envelope into my bag. I walked down the hall. I pushed open the door. Patricia Ellison, in a hospital bed, looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She was not a small woman. Not in any sense of the word I had grown up understanding. She filled rooms. She filled conversations. She filled the particular silence that falls after someone says your name in a tone that means something is about to be decided about you. But in that bed, under the thin hospital blanket, connected to the monitor that beeped in its quiet, indifferent rhythm, she looked like what she was, a 62-year-old woman who had nearly died 3 hours ago, and was only now beginning to understand the distance she'd traveled. She was sedated. Her chest moved slowly. Her hands were folded on top of the blanket the way hands fold when a body has stopped deciding things for itself. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. I did not go in yet. I just looked at her. I let myself do that. Then I went back to the waiting room. I sat down in a chair by the window, the kind of chair that was designed to be functional rather than comfortable, and I took the envelope out of my bag. I set it on my knee. I looked at my name on the front, the handwriting careful and even, the kind of writing that belongs to someone who learned penmanship in a different era and has never let it slip. Gerald Farrow. The man my father trusted to put his final wishes into legal language. The man whose phone number had been disconnected when I called it 6 years ago, standing in my apartment with my father 3 weeks in the ground and a question no one in my family would answer. I opened the envelope. There were 3 pages inside, folded in thirds. A cover letter, typewritten on letterhead. Behind it, 2 photocopied documents, originals, by the look of them, copied with the careful attention of someone who understood they were preserving evidence. I read the cover letter first. Gerald Farrow wrote in the measured language of a man who had been a lawyer for 40 years and had learned to say difficult things without editorializing. He explained that he had been attempting to reach me since 2021. He had tried the last address he had on file, my childhood home in Claremont, which was my mother's address. He had tried directory assistance. He had ultimately written to my employer, Fairview Regional Medical Center, in the summer of 2023, because I was listed as a beneficiary in the estate documents he had on file and my employer was the one verifiable institutional record he could locate. He had not received a response. He had assumed the letter had not reached me. He had kept copies of everything, as was his practice. And then he described those copies. My father's original will, the document Richard Ellison had signed in Gerald Farrow's office in March of 2017, 2 years before his death, specified the following: the marital estate transferred to Patricia in standard terms. The retirement accounts transferred to Patricia as named beneficiary. And there was a codicil, a specific, separate instruction, directing that 2 equal lump sum distributions be made from the liquidated proceeds of a joint investment account held in Richard's name. Each distribution, $95,000. 1 to Danielle Ellison Marsh. 1 to Nora Ellison. Total from that account, $190,000. Half for each daughter. Equal. Farrow had distributed the full $190,000 to Patricia in her capacity as executor, with a signed letter of instruction detailing the equal split. He had Patricia's signed acknowledgement on file, her signature, confirming receipt of the funds and the instruction to distribute equally. He had followed up 6 months later. Patricia had told him both distributions had been made. He had no reason to doubt her. It was only when he attempted to send a routine estate closing notice to my address, the one Patricia had provided, and the letter came back undeliverable, that he began to wonder. He had tried to reach me. He couldn't. He had kept the file open. He had kept the copies. He wrote, near the end of the letter, in language that was as close to plain speech as a retired attorney allows himself, I am not in a position to know what became of the funds directed to you. I can only tell you that the instruction was clear, the acknowledgement was signed, and the original will reflect your father's unambiguous intent. I believe you are entitled to know this. I am sorry it has taken so long to reach you. I read the letter 3 times. I read it a 4th time more slowly, going back to the part about the signed acknowledgement. Patricia's signature, confirming she understood the equal split. $95,000. My father had left me $95,000. He had written it down in front of a lawyer. He had signed his name to it. He had died believing it would reach me. And my mother had looked me in the eye in the living room 10 days after his funeral and told me he wanted me to stand on my own. I folded the pages. I put them back in the envelope. I put the envelope back in my bag. I sat in that chair by the window for a long time with my hands very still in my lap, watching the parking lot fill and empty in the February dark, and I did not cry. Not because I didn't want to. Because the feeling was too large and too old for tears. It was the feeling of something you have quietly carried for 6 years, the almost certainty that you were right, that you had not imagined it, that what you asked about at the dining table 10 days after your father's funeral was a real question about a real thing, being confirmed not in the way you imagined it would be confirmed, but in the only way that matters. In writing. In your father's handwriting. On a document he signed. A nurse came through the waiting room at 8:40 and told me my mother was beginning to come around. If this story is hitting close to something you've felt in your own family, I want you to hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now so you never miss an upload. Your support is what makes it possible to bring these stories to you. Keep watching, because this is the part where everything starts to shift. I went back to my mother's room. Dr. Reyes was there, checking her chart. Patricia's eyes were open, half-focused, the particular unfixed gaze of someone coming up through sedation. I stood at the foot of the bed. She found me without looking for me, her eyes settled on my face the way eyes settle on something familiar, something they were searching for without knowing it. She said my name. Not Danielle. Not Marcus. She said, Nora. Dr. Reyes made a brief note on the chart and stepped back to give us the room. I moved to the side of the bed. I did not take her hand. I stood close enough that she could see me clearly. I'm here, I said. She blinked. Her expression moved through several things, confusion, then recognition, then something harder to name. Something like relief, and underneath the relief, something like shame. The two things sitting together in her face the way they sit in a person who has been expecting a consequence for a long time and is only now meeting it. You came, she said. Her voice was roughed by the oxygen tube, by the hours of sedation, by the event itself. Of course I came. She closed her eyes. Opened them again. She looked at the ceiling. I didn't think you would, she said. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, I know. We stayed like that for a few minutes, her looking at the ceiling, me standing beside the bed, the monitor marking the seconds. It was not a reconciliation. It was not even a conversation. It was two people in the same room with a truth neither of them was ready to say out loud yet. Danielle arrived at 9:15. I heard her before I saw her, her voice in the hallway, bright and urgent, the voice she uses when she's been inconvenienced and is choosing not to say so directly. I came as fast as I could. The connection in Cancun, there was barely any signal. She swept into the room with Marcus 2 steps behind her, still in the clothes of someone who had come from somewhere warm. She went straight to the bed, straight past me, and took Patricia's hand. Mom. Mom, I'm here. I'm so sorry, I came as soon as she stopped. She looked at me. At me, standing on the other side of the bed. And the look on her face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds, surprise, then recalibration, then something that settled into a familiar shape. The shape of a woman who has just arrived at a scene she was supposed to be the center of, and has found someone already there. How long have you been here? She asked. About 3 hours. She turned back to Patricia. You must have been so scared, Mom. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. Patricia said nothing. Her eyes were closed again. In the hallway, a few minutes later, Danielle found me at the water station. She kept her voice measured, which is the particular control she uses when she's angry. The nursing supervisor said you're listed as medical proxy. Yes. Since when? I don't know when she filed it. I found out tonight. Danielle looked at me the way she looks at things she finds improbable. Why would she list you? You're not the one who's, she stopped. Not the one who's what? I asked. She straightened her jacket. I'm just saying it's surprising. I agree, I said. It surprised me too. She went back inside. I stood at the water station for a moment, listening to the monitor through the open door. Then I went and sat in the corridor and thought about my father, and about a document signed in a lawyer's office in 2017, and about what I was going to do with what I now knew. The answer, for that night, was nothing. I was going to do nothing. Patricia was in the cardiac unit for 4 days. She stabilized quickly, which her doctors attributed to the speed of intervention and what Dr. Reyes called her strong baseline constitution. She was moved from the monitored unit to a recovery room on the 2nd day. She was alert, irritable, and had opinions about the food, all signs, the nurses assured me, of a woman who was going to be fine. On the 3rd day, 2 of Patricia's closest friends from the church social committee came to visit. Carol Whitfield and Beverly Nash, women I had known since childhood, women who had watched me grow up and watched my mother tell the story of our family for 30 years. They arrived with flowers and a card signed by the entire committee, 11 names in a cascade of different handwriting. Danielle was already in the room when they arrived. She had positioned herself as the central figure of the recovery narrative, the devoted daughter who had flown back from vacation the moment she heard, who was managing the care team, who was coordinating the discharge plan. She did this the way she did most things, smoothly, without appearing to try. I was in the chair by the window. I had been there most of the day. I had spoken to the discharge planner about home care requirements. I had called Patricia's primary care physician to arrange follow-up. I had done the quiet, logistical work of being the person actually in charge, while Danielle occupied the emotional foreground. Carol and Beverly greeted Patricia warmly, then Danielle warmly, then noticed me. Nora, Carol said, and her tone was the particular warm, careful tone of a woman who has heard one version of a story for many years and is not entirely sure it is the only version. It's so good of you to be here. Of course, I said. Danielle looked at me sideways. She said nothing then. But I saw the calculation pass through her eyes, the recalibration she had been doing since the night she arrived and found me already there. The conversation in the room moved through the usual channels. Patricia's color looked good, what a scare it must have been, how lucky she was to have her daughters with her. Beverly asked how the family was holding up. We're managing, Danielle said, touching Patricia's arm. It's been a lot. Especially, she paused, with the precise timing of someone who has been waiting for an opening, especially having to sort out some of the administrative pieces. The medical forms, the proxy situation. She glanced at me. Things weren't exactly straightforward. Carol looked between us. Patricia, in the bed, said nothing. But her jaw moved. The small, specific movement of a woman who knows what's being implied and has chosen not to stop it. I'm sure Nora's been a great help, Beverly said, lightly. Danielle smiled with her mouth. Nora's always found ways to make herself central in family situations. It's just how she operates. The room was quiet for exactly 1 beat. And Patricia said, from the bed, in a voice still worn from 4 days of recovery, "Danielle. Stop." Danielle turned. "Mom, I know what you're doing." Patricia closed her eyes briefly. "Opened them. And I'm telling you to stop." It was the first time in 22 years I had heard my mother tell Danielle to stop anything. The room processed this in silence. Carol looked at the flower arrangement. Beverly looked at her card. Marcus, standing by the door, looked at his shoes. Danielle looked at our mother with the expression of a woman whose script has just gone off page. I did not smile. I did not react. I sat in the chair by the window and thought about my father's handwriting on a document in an attorney's office. I thought about Pharaoh's letter in my bag. I thought about what Dorothy said in that story I carry with me: the truth doesn't need an announcement. It just needs time. My time came 2 days later. Patricia was discharged on a Friday. The plan, which Danielle organized with the efficiency of someone who needed to be the one organizing it, was for Patricia to recover at Danielle's house for the first 2 weeks. A gathering was arranged for the following Sunday, a small welcome home lunch. Aunt Colleen, Beverly and Carol. 2 cousins who had heard about the hospital event and wanted to see Patricia. Marcus's mother, who had attached herself to our family years ago and treated family occasions as territory she had a right to survey. I was invited. The invitation came from Danielle, in a text, and was worded in the specific way that makes an invitation feel like a summons. "We're doing a small lunch Sunday for Mom's homecoming. You should come." 1 o'clock. I came at 12:55. Danielle's house was the one Patricia had helped them purchase, in part, though I now understood more precisely what "in part" had meant. The living room was set for 11 people, a long table with a linen cloth, a fruit arrangement in the center that Danielle had clearly assembled herself. Patricia sat in the armchair that had been brought from her own house, her own armchair, her own cushion, her own reading glasses on the side table. The throne, relocated. She looked better. Not well, not fully herself, but better. The color had come back to her face. She was watching the room with the eyes of a woman who had been near something large and was still close enough to feel its shadow. Carol and Beverly were there. Aunt Colleen sat at the end of the table. The 2 cousins, Renata and Peter, sat together near the window. Marcus's mother, Claudette, occupied the chair closest to Danielle. 11 people in a room that felt smaller with every minute. I sat at the edge of the gathering, the way I had sat at every gathering for 22 years. I spoke when spoken to. I ate the quiche Danielle had made. I listened. The lunch moved through the standard currents of Patricia's social world: how well she looked, how frightening the whole thing had been, what the doctors had said, how fortunate it was that the neighbor had found her when she did. Danielle navigated all of it smoothly, refilling drinks, steering conversation, standing at the hinge of every exchange. The devoted daughter. The capable one. The one who flew home from vacation. Aunt Colleen, at one point, reached across the table and pressed my hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it for a moment, and let go. Then Claudette, Marcus's mother, turned to Patricia with the warm proprietary smile of someone who considers herself family by association, and said, "Patricia, you are so blessed. 2 wonderful daughters, both here for you. You've raised them beautifully." Patricia said, "Yes." And Danielle said, not loudly, not cruelly, but in the measured tone she has used my entire life, "We've had our challenges. Nora's always done things on her own terms." She set down her fork. "It hasn't always been easy. Especially for Mom." The table went quiet in the particular way tables go quiet when someone has said something that requires a response from someone who hasn't decided yet whether to give one. I looked at Danielle. I looked at the 11 people at that table: Carol, Beverly, Aunt Colleen, Renata, Peter, Claudette, Marcus, the small cousin whose name I always had to remind myself of. I looked at Patricia in her armchair. Patricia was looking at me. And her expression was the most complicated thing I had ever seen on her face: part apprehension, part resignation, part something older. The look of a woman who has been waiting for a moment to arrive and has finally run out of ways to delay it. Danielle, I said. My voice was level. The voice I use in compliance audits, in depositions, in rooms where someone is trying to make the numbers say something the numbers don't say. Can I ask you something? She looked at me. Of course. Did Dad leave us equal? A beat of silence. What? In his will. Did he leave us equal distributions? Danielle's expression shifted, not guilt, not recognition, but the specific confusion of someone who genuinely doesn't know the answer, which told me everything I needed to know about how much Patricia had managed to keep from her own golden child. I opened my bag. I took out the envelope. I set it on the table. This is a letter from Gerald Farrow, Dad's estate attorney. He's been trying to reach me for 4 years. I looked at the table, at Carol, at Beverly, at Aunt Colleen, at all 11 people who had heard some version of my story for the past 6 years. Dad's original will specified equal distributions. $95,000 to Danielle. $95,000 to me. I paused. Patricia signed a written acknowledgement confirming she received the instruction to distribute equally. The room did not make a sound. Beverly set down her fork. Carol looked at Patricia. Aunt Colleen, who had been in that living room 10 days after my father's funeral, watching me ask to see the estate documents, put her hand over her mouth. Patricia sat in her armchair and did not look away from me. She did not speak. Her hands were folded in her lap, the same way they had been folded in the hospital bed, the same stillness, the same quality of a person who has known for a long time that a thing was coming and has finally stopped trying to outrun it. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not perform any part of what I said next. I looked at my mother and I said, clearly enough for every person in that room to hear, he left us equal. That choice was yours. 8 words. Then silence. Danielle's mouth opened. Closed. She looked at Patricia. Mom. Patricia said nothing. Mom. Is that true? Patricia looked at her hands. At the folded hands in her lap. At the place on her left ring finger where a ring had been for 39 years before she'd stopped wearing it 2 years after my father died. I thought, she started. Stopped. Started again. I thought it was better. For the family. I thought, where did the money go? Danielle's voice had lost its managed smoothness. It was just a voice now, just a woman's voice, stripped of performance. Mom. Where did Nora's money go? The silence that followed was 11 people, a linen tablecloth, a fruit arrangement, and a truth that had been kept in a filing cabinet in a retired attorney's office for 6 years, finally standing upright in the room where it had always belonged. Beverly Nash, who had known Patricia Ellison for over 2 decades, stood quietly from the table, collected her coat from the back of her chair, and said, I think I'll give you all some time. Carol, after one long look at Patricia, did the same. The 2 chairs scraped back. The front door opened. The front door closed. 11 people had become 9. And the story my mother had been telling for 22 years, the story of the difficult one, the complicated one, the daughter who couldn't let things go, had its author sitting in an armchair in the afternoon light, unable to find the next sentence. I picked up the envelope. I put it back in my bag. I stood. I'm not here to destroy anything, I said. Not to Patricia. Not to Danielle. To the room, to Aunt Colleen and Renata and Claudette and Marcus and the cousin I always had to remind myself of. I'm here because this family has been told one version of a story for a long time. And the version wasn't true. I looked at my mother one last time. She was looking at me. Her eyes were wet. Not the performed tears of Christmas parties and estate readings and dinner tables. Something older than that. Something real. Nora, she said. I waited. She said nothing more. And I realized that was not because she had nothing to say. It was because she finally understood that there was nothing left that her words could do. I walked to the front door. I opened it. The February air was sharp and clean and indifferent. Behind me, I heard Danielle say, very quietly, "Mom. Tell me what you did with the money." I closed the door gently behind me. Not slammed. Not left open. Closed. Deliberately, and with composure, which is the only way I have ever known how to leave a room. The truth, once it is standing in a room, does not need you to stay and supervise it. That is what I learned in the weeks after I closed Danielle's front door. I had spent 22 years believing that the only way to be heard in my family was to push harder, stay longer, fight louder. I was wrong. The moment I stopped managing the narrative and let the evidence speak for itself, the story corrected itself without me. Danielle called me 4 days later. Her voice was flat and careful, stripped of the smoothness she had been wearing our entire lives. She said, "The $95,000 went toward our house. Mom told Marcus and me it was a gift from her. He didn't know where it came from." A pause. "I didn't know either, Nora. I want you to know that." I believed her. Danielle had never needed to steal anything from me. Our mother had simply handed her what was mine and called it generosity, and Danielle had accepted it because accepting things from Patricia had never cost her anything before. "I believe you," I said. "That doesn't make it okay." "No," I said. "It doesn't." I retained a lawyer, a woman named Sandra Osei, who specialized in estate disputes and had a way of asking questions that made evasion feel structurally impossible. She reviewed Pharaoh's documents, contacted him directly, and confirmed what the letter had described. The acknowledgement was signed, the original will was clear, and the 6-year window for formal estate litigation had technically closed. But Sandra had other tools. A letter was sent to Patricia. Specific, measured, and describing in legal terms what the documented record showed. Patricia did not contest it. Her own attorney, once presented with Pharaoh's file, advised her plainly that contestation would make things considerably worse. 3 weeks after the welcome home lunch, a transfer was made. $95,000, the precise amount my father had left me, deposited into my account. No note. No phone call. Just the number appearing in my balance on a Tuesday morning while I was eating breakfast. I sat with my coffee and looked at it for a long time. It was not what I had imagined, in the years when I had allowed myself to imagine it. There was no apology attached. There was no scene. There was just a number on a screen, arriving quietly, the way things arrive when a person has finally run out of alternatives to the truth. My father had left me $95,000. It had taken 6 years, 1 hospital hallway, and a letter that spent 18 months misfiled 40 feet from my desk to reach me. But it arrived. I did not spend it dramatically. I did not buy something visible or symbolic. I put $40,000 toward a professional development fund I had been building for 2 years, specialized certifications, a conference, the kind of investment in my own work that I had been deferring, without fully knowing why, for as long as I could remember. The rest went into savings. Quiet, undramatic savings. The kind my father would have approved of. Aunt Colleen called on a Thursday evening. She said, "I was in that living room when you asked to see the will. I should have pushed harder. I'm sorry I didn't." I told her what I meant it, she had held my hand at the table, and I had felt it, and it had mattered. Carol Whitfield never mentioned the lunch directly. But at Easter, when Patricia's social circle gathered for the first time since the hospital, Carol crossed the room and sat next to me before she sat next to anyone else. That was enough. Patricia and I have not reconciled. I want to be honest about that. We speak, short calls, careful words, the language of 2 people who have agreed to be civil without agreeing on what happened between them. She has not apologized. I have not demanded it, because I have learned that a demanded apology is not an apology. It is a performance, and I am finished being a participant in performances. What she has done, she stopped telling people I was the difficult one. In the months since the lunch, not one person from Claremont has mentioned to me the story Patricia used to circulate. The absence of a story, in a town where stories travel through casseroles and church parking lots, is its own kind of statement. There is one thing I carry, and I want to say it plainly. The doctor pulled me aside in that hospital hallway because a letter had been misfiled for 18 months in an administrative archive 40 feet from my office. That is how close the truth was to me, for a year and a half, without my knowing. Some days I think about that. I think about how the truth was sitting in a filing cabinet in the same building where I walked to work every morning, and I had no idea. And then I think, the truth was also in my father's hands when he signed his name in Gerald Farrow's office. It was in the envelope he trusted the law to protect. It was in my name on the document, waiting. Patient in the way that true things are patient. Needing only the right moment to be opened. My mother told every room I was the difficult one for 22 years. What she could not tell them, what she did not know, or knew and chose not to say, was why. I was difficult because I asked questions. I was difficult because I saw clearly. I was difficult because I was the only person in that family who refused to let the story stand in place of the truth. My father knew that. He left me $95,000 and a document that said, "I see you. You are equal. Whatever happens, the record will say so. Whatever happens, the record says so. I am still the difficult one. I have decided to keep it." Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story moved you, please check out the other videos on your screen right now. I think you'll find exactly what you're looking for. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. I'll see you in the next story.